here we go. Julie, it's really incredibly generous of you to agree to do this little talk.
Generous of you to take the time.
Well, you've been acknowledged left to right these years with the Pulitzer, recent Pulitzer, and the Herb Albert Prize, which was a very big deal, 2 very big deals in the recent years. So, how does that make you feel?
It's a little surreal, you know. It's kind of a little crazy. I mean, because as an artist, you write your music, you do your thing, and I think the journey of an artist is a combination of being dissed and being celebrated, and you hope you get some kind of balance. And
there's no middle ground.
There's no middle ground. You kind of have to weather it. Sometimes people will not be interested in what you're doing, and then suddenly there's a little, explosion of interest. And so this year's been like that, and it's been fun. I've just been, in a way, trying to celebrate and go to as many performances as I can. Maybe probably more than I would usually, just to say, hey, it's been a fun year, and just feel that energy.
And people want to see you. They want to be
sometimes
seen with you.
Yes.
Yes.
But it's been fun. It's been a nice moment to shine a spotlight on that particular piece too. It was a it was a bigger project, and lots of people involved. So it's kind of a joint win in a way. We all kind of feel it together. So, yeah, it's been. Take it when it comes, kind of.
Well, speaking of that piece, can you tell us about the piece that brought you the Pulitzer Prize?
Yeah, it's called Anthracite Fields, and it's kind of a research piece. So I spent at least a good part of a year going to this region in the United States. It's in the state of Pennsylvania and kind of the northeastern corner, and it's a coal mining region, like many regions in the world. It's was a big industry, and now the industry is pretty much closed down. But
ghost town.
Yeah,
like
I mean, a little bit. Some economic issues in that area, but still a lot of people who are living there who were connected to the industry. But an incredible history, incredible labor history in the U.S. Just all of the issues related to safety, because of course working in a mine underground is incredibly dangerous, and
we've had several mining accidents in China in the past decade that were significant.
Yeah, so I think when that happens, everybody wakes up and goes, oh, there are these issues of people going underground, and what can you do to make things safer? So over the years, I mean, also lots of immigration, waves of immigrants coming in to work in this area and find a new life. And so this became really fascinating to me. I'm also from that area, so I was born and raised in a small town in Pennsylvania about a couple hours south of this region. So right between coal country and a very large city called Philadelphia, and in between the two. So I, and the commission was from a choir from my home state, so I thought, this is kind of nice. Let me look at the history of where I'm from a little bit. And so I interviewed lots of people and read lots of articles and books, and looked at maps, and just learned everything I could about what happened in mostly the turn of the century, somewhere like late 1800s into up till about 1940 or 50, and made a piece out of it. Just kind of took out the themes that were very moving to me and made movements and.
Yeah, I guess, for us composers, music is our primary domain of artistic articulation. So I guess being, immersed in this surroundings of this kind of, you call it the mining culture, but is it fair to say that this is more like a grassroots American, even, a bit of folk elements in it that attracted you? I mean, there must be something about these cultural phenomenons that interests you in a musical context.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about
absolutely.
that?
And there are definitely ties between the subject matter and the music. And I have a very strong background in folk music, so I studied piano and classical music, but then spent a lot of time, especially in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I was studying involved with lots of kind of folk activity, playing an instrument called a mountain dulcimer, which is a kind of typical Appalachian folk instrument, and singing. And
how well do you play it?
not very well, but I really loved it, and you just picked it up. And it's really kind of almost like an accompanying instrument. Some people play it as they perform with it instrumentally, but mostly you're singing and then accompanying yourself on this laptop string instrument. So and then I also picked up instruments like the bones, which are these wooden clickety clackety kind of things. So you're just having fun and playing guitar and things like that. And always combining these two interests of music. And so this piece does bring some of those elements into the mix. But I'd say also when I started studying, I didn't begin studying music. I was very interested in social sciences and things like labor history and cultural, sociological issues, and I almost really accidentally walked into a music class. And so this is also a return to these interests and looking at different populations and what the communities are about, and it combines these two things. It's like almost like coming home.
I can very much relate to that in terms of social science and stuff I'm really interested in, like psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy, and all this interdisciplinary. I mean, I feel like there is I've met very rarely a composer who is very much focused just within sort of very internally. I feel like our community, the composer community, what really interests me is that the composers are always, their radars are always out there, sort of pick up whatever it is that is coming our way, and then turning it into a piece like yours, having all these cultural and even regional. I want to just turn the conversation around a little bit to our interaction back when I was a student at MSM, and I remember presenting my portfolio at the jury, and you were like the only woman composer in the room, and you had this really gorgeous hair, and you were all backlit. I had vivid memory of you.
Really
you were
sweet.
backlit, and it was just glorious looking at your head with this lights, and you were the only one that's backlit. And then Nils, and he was talking up a storm. Okay, you did this, that, and then we played my piano trio. It was titled Shadow, and it was sort of a musical depiction of an autistic kid that kind of bounded to me. And then I remember like everybody else was talking about it, and you were just listening and you weren't saying anything. And at one point I was like, is Miss Wolfe gonna say anything? And then at the end, and you just looked around and the room kind of quieted down. I guess people run out of things to say. and then you just kind of very carefully, really gingerly, I'd love to hear more of this, and you were pointing at my score. So my first reaction was, oh my God, did she say that because I didn't develop the material, or did she actually like my material? Because, for when I was a student, when I first got to know your music, they sound foreign to me, given where I am from. But there's always this mysterious sort of captivation that kind of really interested me about your sound world, although it's foreign, and which is maybe why that's so attractive. So I always thought I was the very loyal spiritual daughter of the Austrian German whole lineage, and I didn't feel like that our aesthetic language would have so much in common. Like you would appreciate my vocabulary and I would appreciate yours. So on that ground, and maybe add an effort to sort of transcend the facade of our vernacular in our sound world, do you think it's acceptable, let's say, to say that you have your school of, like, have you established, or do you feel comfortable being labeled as sort of this Bang on a Ken or Banglewood sound world, school of aesthetics?
Well, it's always tricky. It's interesting because artists aren't always the people that find ways of talking about the art. Like sometimes it
True.
comes from the outside.
True.
And I think even in terms like the minimalists came from somewhere else. And I think that it's helpful sometimes because it sort of puts it into a time frame and into a kind of aesthetic. But I'm definitely a part of that kind of home. It's kind of my home base, banging a can in terms of growing up with my colleagues. By growing up, I just mean, as young professional adults. And experimenting in certain ways, using amplification, connecting to some pop sensibility, some folk sensibility, but also a kind of return to interest in rhythm and modality, I guess. So I belong to that, but I'm also should say it's such a great time in New York right now because it's very open, and I think the one thing that I really appreciate is hearing a diversity of voices and feeling like it's not just one school. Which it was a little more like that when I was growing up. When I was just starting to study music, it was very restricted. And now there are lots of interesting avenues. And I think the fact that we're very different is so great. I mean, why would we want to all be the same? It just seems so boring. So I think that it's a time, especially I feel it here in New York, where there's lots of openness, experimentation, welcoming in of different kinds of interests, microtonality or kind of installations or walls of sound, and working with materials in a very interesting way. So I think it is a really open time. But I should say back to what you're saying about being at your jury, because if I said I wanted to hear more, I wish I could remember the exact moment, but did. Sometimes you hear something wonderful in a piece and it goes by and you just like, I want to live in that. And there must have been a moment where I wanted to live in something that you had done. But I also think it's a very interesting point about women in composition, because it's just recent that you really see significant women in significant positions. Certainly the Pulitzer Prize, very few until recent years.
Do you know
Very
that
few.
in Opera America now there is a women leadership organization network now?
Right.
Women in power in arts, in leadership are getting together and making a social statement.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And also that you're teaching and I'm teaching, there weren't any women teachers, pretty much. I mean, few, maybe one or two I can think of, in universities or in conservatories. And I think that's so important. I mean, just the role model. For me, when I first began writing music, I had two women, amazing teachers. And just seeing them, there they are, and they're writing music. There's, of course, they have to be a great teacher, and I've had great male teachers have been wonderful. But something about having at least a significant number of women out there in those sort of leadership positions, it says something to younger women who want to create.
I actually have been very fortunate in the sense that several of my awards and commissions that I've won were encouraged by the women organizations, like the Detroit Symphony, and was the Elaine Lebenbaum Commission Prize, which is for women composers of any nationality in the world. And then the opera that I'm working on right now is also founded by the Tolman Foundation, which is through the female commissioning grants through Opera America. So it's really and there are so many opportunities out there for young women composers. And so since we're on this subject, and it's wonderful that you bring this up, what are some of the challenges that in your career that you've noticed and you've managed to overcome or have been supported by this shift, the social shift of maybe we call it the new feminism, maybe.
Sure.
Why not? What are some of the challenges?
That's a good question, because there both have been challenges and opportunities. I think because a door opened, there was a place to step into, and so I think that there were some even very good opportunities that came because of this change. Challenges, they're more small and subtle. I've definitely worked with conductors who didn't really pay attention to the piece. I mean, that's rare, but I've definitely been in situations where you can definitely tell. Suddenly you feel like a schoolgirl. You think, oh wait a minute, I'm not a schoolgirl. But you have this feeling. You have to remind
Right.
yourself. And I think it's also just trusting who you are, because it's not like you want to be something you're not. I am a woman living in New York, in America right now, and whatever that means for however I was raised, or what my journey has been. There's something about that.
How were you raised?
Well, I had a great upbringing, exactly, but in a small town. I think back to it, and my parents were really very, very supportive. I was a very good student, and my dad was a physician. He delivered babies, actually, and he really wanted me to be a doctor. And I used to be so like, oh, Dad, I'm really not interested in science right now. Actually, I thought now I find science fascinating. I think I just didn't have whatever terrific science teachers. But the fact that he was pushing for that actually meant that there was no difference between me and my brothers. So it was very much like, you're capable, you can do it. And I didn't happen to be in the field of medicine, but I think I took that encouragement and thought, oh, I guess I can do this also, this creating. And I think that's been sort of the block, is that there have been many women performers. Of course, that's increased recently also, but the idea of being the person who constructs something and builds something, that role and that kind of courage, I think, for women is really blossomed, certainly in the United States, in the past however many years, 50 years or so.
Yeah, when I was at Shanghai Conservatory, very briefly, my department, 37, 40 composers. There were maybe 5 that were not women composers. And we are a generation, 2 generations now, of single child. We don't have siblings, and many of us really don't know the difference. We were just raised as this kid who are expected to perform well, to excel in the society. So I can very much identify with, so I'm really curious, do you think there's, especially since, gender and sexuality has been a really hot topic in scholarship, in musicology, and ethnomusicology, do you think there are ways for music to, not necessarily our music, because we are women composer, but just in the general sense of musicality, that can embrace or can clarify what it means that this piece is written by a female composer?
That's a very complex issue, I think, and I know. So I have a little bit of a. I guess I roll my eyes sometimes at the musicological approaches to, determining that or talking about that, only because, first of all, I know that I'm not an expert on psychology or anything, but I think we all have male and female parts, sort of yin yang, whatever.
Absolutely.
And so I think that and so we're complex beings, and I don't think you can tell if a piece is written by a man or a woman. Certainly, people always make mistakes with me. In fact, it's funny because I've done a bunch of pieces with Michael Gordon and David Lang, these kind of collaborative works. And in the beginning, people often thought the movements that David wrote were written by me, because he has a wonderful kind of sensibility to write something very beautiful and sweet.
I remember, absolutely.
And people say, oh, that must be Julie, but it was like, no, she's the one that was like, rah, 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 the kind of like. And so I think we're all, certainly David has many different sides and energies in his music, but we certainly are, the music is a reflection of who we are, whether you're from China, from the United States, whether you grew up in a city or the country, whether you had, oatmeal for breakfast, whether you mountain climb, all these different things become a part of the energy of your music. But I don't think it's definable in terms of, yes, there's a sensibility coming in now because women are writing. I think it's broadened, but not in the sense that you can point to and say that is an element that's female. I think that's a little trickier for me.
I just sort of tracing back to you. I think you implied there was a difficult time, maybe a few decades ago, when the aesthetic paradigms in this country was sort of very clear cut. And I remember attending a piece of yours, and that was a very exciting evening at American Composers Orchestra. I think it was 2013 or 2012, and you had a piece with a multimedia on a film. I think it was called Fuel, and it felt like the psychological time for me. The piece was no more than 15 minutes or 10 minutes. It felt like the time just went by really quickly. And then there's this relentlessness in your music, and there's this drive, and it's almost sort of this. I mean, I remember the film. The little bits I remember was very sort of steel and modern and hard. The images looked to me as cold but your music also carries a sense of urgency and anxiety in a way that it was just very captivating for me. So, and minimalist or not, we were talking about the labels. I feel that, and I myself, believe it or not, like 2 generations after you, at MSM, I also felt that divide, where there's the composers who were just infatuated with the European modernism, that is the spectra, the Boulez lineage, and their music were so complex. And they're also someone that, well, there's you, of course, but there's no one else like you at MSM when I was there. But there's also Feldman, where there are fewer notes to be heard, but I am very hesitant to call that music not complex. You see, so I would love to know what you think, and I would also not characterize your music in terms of the assumptions, the presumptions of minimalism to be somewhat not complex. I actually think that some of your sound world, I mean, I don't know how you come up with it, and some of these clusters that your ears, I guess, work in a way that that is just, it's not simple, and it's actually very complex in a way that it sustains for so long. And goes back to your comment to my music, it just sort of a moment just goes away. It almost like you live in that kind of world. So can you talk a little bit about what it means to have music that are very complex and maybe in an aesthetic world that is driven by this sort of minimalistic complexity?
Yeah.
If it's fair
it's
to
interesting.
say that.
I mean, and I'd say I'm influenced by lots of different kinds of music, and sometimes you can hear it, sometimes I'm influenced by it, but no one else would ever hear it. So I guess if I start there, just in terms of where I come from, and one thing that it was important to us actually when we were beginning Bang in a Can was that we wanted to present music and be connected to music from different aesthetics. So even while there was, of my generation, there was a kind of school of thought coming up that, like I said, connected to rock or amplification or distorted guitars or whatever, there was this love of powerful music regardless of the language. So, for example, Xenakis. I'm a Xenakis fanatic.
Me too.
It's just amazing.
Me too.
And he kind of stands alone. Now that's very interesting to me that he stands, for me at least. I guess also Ligeti. I like Ligeti quite a bit, but
me too.
They kind of stand out as this very strong individual voice, not just complex. Certainly someone like Xenakis and certainly Ligeti are using complex little techniques to create amazing textures, very, very finely crafted, very detailed. Very different way of working than, let's say, someone like Steve Reich, who's also making a beautiful creation, a kind of architecture to pieces. But I think maybe it's the architecture that's interesting to me. the gestalt and the wholeness of it, the picture of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't necessarily put a value either way on complex or simple. I think you're right in saying that. What does that mean, really, in a certain sense? So that Feldman, who wrote these amazingly beautiful and very finely detailed pieces that just happen to be very slow and long and spare, that's a beautiful, I guess, flip side of something like Ligeti, where every little note is moving quickly and they're all kind of layering on top of each other. But that's what makes the world interesting, is that there are these powerful voices that are just digging deep into the world that they're creating. So I would say that it's all in there, and I've been influenced by the minimalists probably because of the energy and this kind of return to a kind of directness that was interesting to me, but at the same time influenced by people like Louis Andriessen, who's I guess sometimes thought of as a European minimalist because of the dissonance. The American minimalists, that first generation, were very, very pure and very consonant, and I love that music. But I'm of a noisier generation, so you'll hear like more, like you're saying, clusters or distortion and edgy, kind of scrapey sounds.
Well, the world is also noisier.
And the world. Right. Here we are in New York, where
Exactly.
there's so much. I think that also has an impact, too, just being in this environment.
And also, just the acknowledgement that the world isn't that polished, isn't that friendly, isn't that nice.
Yeah, there's struggle. Lots of it.
And
lots of struggle.
lots of dissonance.
And lots of dissonance, yeah. And beautiful dissonance at times, and not so beautiful.
And we all yearn for a resolution of some kind, I guess.
Yeah.
And speaking of dissonance, I would love to ask you, what keeps you up at night? What are some of the issues that you think, really the new music community here in the States, problems that you think that really urgently needs to be addressed, and
That's
do you
a
have
good
do you have a way of maybe like a way of addressing them? Maybe we could solve a few issues in the new music community.
It's a good question. There seem to be more problems in the past, I'd say. I mean, I definitely felt that when we were just out of school and coming to New York, it was not such a friendly place. I mean, there were very few opportunities, and you kind of had to follow the lead of a major teacher. They were the setup was not so conducive to, certainly for a younger composer. And now the one thing that's great, I can say, that's happening is there are a lot of people taking initiative, so starting their own ensembles or building a project from the ground up, not necessarily waiting for someone to come and define what they'll be doing, but just thinking, what is it I want to do, and how do I put the pieces together?
Well, you were the pioneer for
among others,
this.
but we had felt like almost we didn't even have a choice. It was really no other way to get the music out there and to to sort of generate some energy, and certainly like Reich and Glass. I mean, they carved their own paths, and the Kronos Quartet. So we had a lot of also role models to watch. But what we did was a little bit different because it became more like an organization, I guess. But today, that's a good question. I think that in a certain sense, this might sound kind of corny, but maybe it's a sort of spiritual digging that I think is helpful. We live in such a corporate age, and in the sense that so much of our lives are influenced by larger corporate entities, and that's not necessarily always a bad thing, but I think in general the danger is that you can I guess not feel empowered to have your individual voice and go the path that you want. And I think just feeling this independence outside of commercial interests, and I think that the marketplace is a great thing.
But corporate runs America. We know
yes.
that.
and I think that, but just feeling, as an artist, what's your voice, and how do you individualize yourself away from all of that sensibility, that you have to sell, or you have to this, you have to that, just feeling like, what is it that you want to say, and feeling empowered by that, regardless of, let's say, whether it has commercial viability or not. I guess we're all in this art world, so we know it's not particularly commercial anyway. But I think empowering ourselves to just not feel, to take it into our own hands. So I think that, but to say that there really is a lot going on, I think that people are doing that, and certainly there's a good, friendly atmosphere in this next generation. Everyone collectively working together, even forming collectives, composer collectives, and record companies, their own small labels. Everything's, in a certain sense, some of the technological advances has kind of leveled the playing field, because people can publish themselves and do it themselves. And
I'm self-published.
Yes, me too. I am too. I mean, I work with a distributor of a publishing company that distributes, but we own our own copyrights.
Right.
And
Red Poppy
is just Michael, David, and I getting together and making our own little company. And feeling that empowerment. Yes, you do not have to wait for some outside large entity to come and put a stamp on you, that you yourself put the stamp on. And I think that it's a good era now. It's a good time for feeling empowered in that way.
And that sense of liberty, for me, and as 2 generations younger, maybe 1 generation.
I know. It's always hard to think. Is generation 20 years?
I know,
is it 10 years?
I feel like in the pace of humanity now, 1 generation is really 10 years.
If that's true, actually, yeah.
Yes.
Because now you're teaching and you have students,
exactly.
And I teach, right? So it's kind of.
And my students are only 10 years younger than me, and
I could be the mom of most of my students.
And I feel like they're dealing with a set of other issues that seems to me like, sometimes I don't want to feel like sound like an old fart and like, yeah, been there, done that. but
that's why you
true.
teach too, because you have been there and done it. I think that's what's helpful, not only to talk about technical things, like musical technical things, but also to guide them to say, well, this was my experience, and of course it's a different world today. It's going to be a little bit of a different experience, but the fact that you have weathered through doing a large project, working with this kind of presenter or whatever the issue is.
Talk the talk, walk the walk.
Yeah, exactly.
And getting some lessons learned the hard way out there in the real world, sure. Yeah. So a large part of this audience who are watching this video are composers at the at the Shanghai Conservatory, my alma mater, one of my alma maters. And when I was back in Shanghai maybe 3 years ago, I did a lecture. And I remember there is a young composer, a young woman composer in the classroom, and she was having a very difficult time as sort of the younger generation, even from me, young emerging composer who has a very difficult time picturing her position in this world that is classical music, right? Classical concert music. And in the meantime, and I think this is true for most of my students at CUNY, is that they're having a really difficult time writing down music that they feel that they can live with. And of course, it's easy for me to say, well, you just got to put in the mileage, you get 4 hours a day in, and 10,000 hours later, but what will be some of the, if you can trace your memory back to your student days, and what are some of the ways that helped you, just get notes on the page and be able to just be okay with it and then feel like you are somehow connected to this larger, music world, the classical music world, which is, often very intimidating.
Right.
And so,
well, I think it's important to know that you're always learning and you're always evolving and you're always growing, no matter what stage you're at. So, when you're first starting, first of all, one thing about being young is it's okay to make mistakes. That's really important. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to experiment your whole life, but especially when you're younger and you're trying to think, what is my voice? I mean, what is a voice? A voice is what you like. So you have to trust, I like that. I don't have to think, why do I like that? You can certainly think about why do I like that, but trusting what you love and responding to it and saying, oh, that's powerful to me. The act of actually getting to the place where you feel completely 100% incredible about everything you do, well, that's kind of a lifetime journey. So I think that there's the really positive side of self-criticism, and then there's a negative side of self-criticism. I think really
Very
great
true.
composers, really great composers is kind of a big term, but are self-critical. They're always looking, how could it be better? What can I do? And oh, I'm not sure if I was completely satisfied with it. They're evaluating. They're struggling. That makes your work great, because you're not just gonna say, oh, that sounds good.
I feel like the more I've been doing this, professionally for 15 years, and I feel like this insecurity has actually increased, and the self-criticism has actually increased over the years. And
Yes,
but in the meantime, I also feel that when I completed the piece, I have a much better sense of what I've accomplished also, but what remains to be done in the future. So yeah, I can completely understand, like, there's two sides to this feeling.
And I think when you're mentioning someone who's struggling, I think that sometimes younger composers can also get tripped up by being too self-critical, like stopping before they even get it on the page, or stopping before it's really spelled out. Okay, like you're saying, I think when you said get up and go for it, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but put the time in. That's a lot of it, just making time, and this kind of precious kind of sacred time almost. This is my writing time. I'm turning off my phone. I'm turning this off.
Exactly.
These hours are mine to create.
Can you talk about your ritual?
Oh, well, I'm not always so perfectly about this, but just waking up in the morning. I love working in the morning.
Oh,
and
me
just
too.
saying,
Me too.
Phone is off.
Yeah.
It was easier when there was a phone machine. Now that there's a cell phone, it's like, the devil, or it's terrible. So, just put it out, don't listen to it, and give that time. And if you do that regularly, something will happen. It might take, you have a good day and a bad day, but even the bad days are building towards the product. They're like,
I agree.
The struggle is part of it.
Yeah, I have an hourglass, and it's a half-hour hourglass, and I've made a rule. When the hourglass is on, nothing interrupts. I do half-an-hour intervals. I've learned it the hard way that sometimes I don't.
This is great.
I'm getting
an hourglass.
Sometimes I sit there for 2 hours and I don't get up, and then I get sick. So half an hour, I get up, get tea, get coffee, come back, turn it over, another half an hour. Emails are off, nothing else is on. When hourglass is on, it's composing time. Period.
That's great.
Nothing interrupts.
Yeah, and I think that would help younger people too. And but I think that also along with that is not being overly critical. Saying, okay, I'll try this. I mean, certainly if I looked at some of my earliest works, you can hear a lot of Stravinsky in them. I mean, that's the music I loved studying, and you can hear some Andreessen influences. I mean, now I think that maybe I've gotten to the point where I found the things that I love, so therefore that's my voice, and that's still evolving, and I hope it does always evolve. I wouldn't want to stay stuck in one place. So I think the reason everyone's in music is because they love music. I mean, a few people are maybe forced at a young age, but no one really stays with it unless it's a passion. And so you have to kind of bring yourself back to, well, why am I in this in the first place? Like, what brought me here? And sometimes, especially when I was younger, I would just put on a piece that I loved, not of mine, of someone else's. I remember just putting on Steve Reich's Tehillim, and I just thought, oh, that's such a joyful piece. And, oh, right, of course, music is great. I love music. Whatever that piece is for you, whether it's a band that you like to listen to, or symphony.
Recently, what have you heard that touched you, or that remained, that sort of stood out?
Wow, that's what I think what I listen to. It's so hard to say because I'm always sort of listening to different things for different reasons too. Probably recently I've been listening to a lot of American fiddlers, so that's kind of not typically
fun.
Yeah, really fun. There's one guy I love. I love the work of this guy Bruce Molsky, and so a piece that I wrote recently, very inspired by his work. Like he retunes the bottom string up from the violin from G to A, and so you get this very open A D A resonance, and so you can just do these kind of double stop fiddly type of things. Again,
cool.
Connected to the kind of American folk tradition, but So I was just listening to him recently. It was great. And then mostly what I'm listening to are a lot of things that I'm teaching. So I'm listening to a lot of string quartets because I'm teaching here at NYU a class that's a year-long process for the students to write a string quartet. They're writing for the Jack Quartet. And so we go through listening to pieces and talking about pieces. And I think today someone's talking about Philip Glass' Fifth String Quartet. So students take on a particular quartet they want to talk about. We looked at Black Angels and Xenakis' Tetris. So it's been a lot of string quartets just because of, partly because of the teaching. But
Stockhausen Helicopter.
Yeah, Helicopter. We haven't gotten to that one. So much to talk about that one. That'd be really fun. But other than that, I'm trying to think of what I've heard recently that really, I have to think about it. I can't think. Somehow my mind's drawing a blank.
I've been restudying Ligeti's viola sonatas, especially the first movement. And just, I've even played it for my music appreciation, like fundamentals, the non-music majors at Brooklyn College. And it's so interesting that I keep hearing this, is that music listeners, average music listeners that are even younger, these are 19-year-old college kids, and they hear this music for the first time. This is the first movement of the viola sonatas. And he told me that this is about a person who just tries and tries and fail and try again, fail again, try harder, fail even harder, and eventually he just have to make peace with it and surrender. And bless you.
Okay.
And he said that is so tragic. I keep hearing that from different classes that I've taught, both at NYU and at Brooklyn College. Do you think, and this will be pretty much our last question, do you think that your music also carries that narrative, or it's like do you think you have all these stories, things that influenced you, events, culture that influenced you? Do you think music can carry that narrativity, so to speak?
Well, yeah, I definitely think music is, the way I should say that part of the reason that I was drawn to music is because it's not words. Even though I spent probably most of my creative work was originally with words, and then when I sort of, I guess, discovered composing, what I loved about it was that you couldn't explain it. It somehow is some kind of human expression, of the individual person, of that region, of that time period. It's like a history marker, and you don't know why. I mean, it's not like you can say, well, it's explaining that today, this. It's not literal. So that's something I love about music, that it is this powerful expression that you can't really explain. We try to, but we can't really explain. That said, there certainly are pieces that have narratives, and I've definitely worked with pieces. At first I really resisted. I thought, no, it's just music and energy. It's not a story. But my interest in history and stories came back into my own music, particularly with this piece Steel Hammer, and actually maybe earlier with the piece Cruel Sister, which is, there are no words in that piece, but it's based on the arc of an old Scottish ballad.
String orchestra piece? Cruel Sister, string orchestra.
String orchestra, yeah. And so in that sense, I could, in a way, let myself tell a very literal story, even though no one else will know. They don't have to know it to listen to the piece. So I've now come back to have an interest in working with the story, kind of storytelling and narrative. But I think that ultimately the music tells the story in this very primal and interesting way.
And is it okay with you if people have a different interpretation of what they think that story is?
Well, that's the beauty of music. I mean, you can walk out of a concert and people can feel, that was so sad. And people say, that was so joyful. I mean, it's amazing. I think, wow.
You're just telling the story of the beginning of my dissertation.
Oh, really? Right. I love that, yeah. And people are very, because of their own experience or their own ears, whatever, they're going to take their own journey.
And they bring so much to the musical experience, the history of their ears, what they love when they're 12. And,
Oh, yeah.
and I think that stays with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, Julie, it's really a pleasure, and thank you so much. And I'm sure
Thank all of
everybody
you.
in the audience
Thank you,
really
Jenny.
appreciated. You're very personable and just so generous. And thank you.
Thank you.